As a small business owner, have you ever felt overwhelmed by the pressure of choosing the right hire or leading a team? Or have you ever found yourself tolerating a bad hire because you fear trying and failing again as you repeat the hiring process? If so, you're not alone, and you are in the right place. Welcome to the Growing Your Team podcast. The Growing Your Team podcast teaches business owners like you to expand your unique business by teaching you to master the hiring and team management process. Hiring and managing a team does not have to be a challenge. You just have to learn to do it right. And the Growing Your Team podcast teaches you how to become a confident leader who hires right every single time. Now, let's jump into the show where each episode you will learn tips on how to identify what type of help you need on your team, how to source amazing candidates, how to conduct interviews that lead you to your ideal team member, how to onboard successfully, and how to lead every person in your business so you have a team of rock stars who you are happy to pay every single paycheck. So let's jump in and teach you how to hire like a pro.
Hello, Jamie Van Kuyk here, and welcome back to the Growing Your Team podcast. Today, I have on guest Dr. Amy Climer. Amy teaches teams to be creative and innovative. She is a speaker, trainer, and consultant in creativity, innovation, and team development. She uses research-based strategies, tools, and techniques to teach teams how to innovate on demand. Amy holds a PhD in leadership and change, and her research led to the Deliberate Creative Team Scale, designed to measure the three critical dimensions of team creativity, which she explains in her new book, Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results. Amy is a TEDx speaker and MC and host of the Deliberate Creative podcast. She is the designer of Climer cards, a creativity and team building tool used by thousands to deepen conversations and generate ideas. Amy is trained and certified in creative problem solving, immunity to change, and the foresight thinking system. In this conversation, Amy and I are talking all about creativity inside our teams, inside small businesses. We're talking about what this actually means, because no, it does not mean artistic, and why it is so important if we want to be a business that is able to properly pivot and change with the times and keep our ideas fresh, and more importantly, have teams that can be self-thinkers. That is one of the things I hear all the time from business owners, is that they want teams that can be self-leaders, self-thinkers. But what they fail to realize is they have to create the environment that allows for this. And a lot of what Amy and I talk about is some of the groundwork that allows for your team to be self-thinkers and self-leaders inside our small businesses. So let's jump into the conversation.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Growing Your Team podcast.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited for today's conversation. I can't wait to dive into some of these topics. But before we do, can you take a brief moment and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I know you shared a little bit already. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I have a consulting practice. I've had this practice since 2009, and I teach teams and organizations how to be more creative. My clients are across industries: healthcare, manufacturing, nonprofits, government, all over, which I love because all of these industries have people that need to be creative. And I do a lot around creativity and teams. And as we'll talk about soon, I just wrote my first book, which I'm really excited about.
So excited to dive into that so you can share about your book. But before we do that, let's start back at the very, very beginning of everything. Because I know as we were talking about off air before we hit record, and as I shared, like I've experienced in the past, like when you use the term creative inside a business and things like that, people just assume artistic,
Mm.
things like that. And a lot of people are like, well, I'm not in a creative industry. I know a lot of times if you go to my website, I think there's still language out there. And occasionally I use it that I work with creative entrepreneurs. And I have people tell me, well, I don't run an artistic business. I'm not in the creative industry. And I'm like, that's not what I mean. So what is creativity and why does it matter within businesses?
I love this because I get the same thing that there's a lot of confusion and people think that creativity has to do with art when actually maybe there's a little bit of overlap, but they're not the same thing. So the definition that I use is creativity is novelty that is valuable. So meaning novel, meaning different, new, unique, original, valuable, could be financially valuable, but it doesn't have to be. It could be something that's like emotionally valuable or um, it helps us be more productive or efficient or effective. Like there's all different ways to interpret valuable. So ultimately, creativity is novelty that is valuable. And I think it's really important because really this is how, as humans, we solve problems. And if when I think about like all the problems on our planet, which are quite numerous, and many of them we caused, I also feel like we actually have the capacity to solve all of them if we are able and willing to be creative, to innovate, to try new things, to approach things in a way that is novel and valuable. And I think that's sort of like the big global scale, but this definitely matters in businesses. And there are so many examples just, I mean, even like when COVID hit and all of these businesses, some of them like pivoted and responded really well and got innovative, and some of them kind of froze and didn't know what to do and slowly withered away. So I think that from a business perspective, it's really important for the success of a business to be innovative and creative.
Yes, like I agree 100% because I know when I say I work with creative entrepreneurs, it's those that are willing to think outside the box. It's not saying I have to do this in my business because everyone else who's in my industry does this within their business, that they're going and adding the products or services that make sense for them. They're hiring the team that makes sense for them. And maybe their business BFF that's in the same industry hired X position first, but it doesn't mean it's the right position for you to hire first. Or what tasks can you get off your plate that should go to someone of that title? That we're not cookie cutter, everything the same. It's we're really building what is best for us in our business, for how we want to operate, for how we want to show up for our clients, which can be completely different than someone else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know I struggled with that when I first started my business back in 2009. And for the first couple of years, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. And, there is a lot of advice out in the world. And I was, trying to take some of the advice I was hearing. And I realized eventually, like, it wasn't fitting. It didn't fit my type of business or my personality. And I kept hitting these roadblocks and finally had to figure out, okay, what is going to work best for me? And I would imagine a lot of your listeners have that same experience.
Yes, definitely. It's what's going to fit best for me. What can I do? Because I know when I was very early in my business and I was going in and talking to someone, and it was a gentleman who had been in business for, I think he had his business for 35 years. And he was talking to me, and like all I kept saying in my head was, I don't think you remember what it's like day one of your business. You
Yeah,
know what it's like 35 years later when everything is, well, not that everything's always easy in a business, but
of course.
the problems that you have when you're 35 years in and you have this huge team is completely different than the problems you have when you're trying to get your very first client and you're trying to figure out how do I even build a website? Is that something I can do? Is it something I can hire for? Or how can I afford this? And how can I do any of this stuff that I didn't know I was going to have to do when I decided that I could provide these services or these products to somebody?
Yes, it's so true. Yeah, that progression, it makes a big difference. What we're thinking on day one to day 30. Well, I'm not at year 30 yet, but maybe eventually.
Yes, you'll get there. It'll be great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unless I retire first.
Well, then that's a good reason not to get there.
That's true. That's
Right?
true.
So before we get into a lot of other things, tell us about your book.
Okay, so the book is called Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results. And it is based on, I just try to put everything in there that I know about leading creativity in teams. And the sort of the foundation of it is based on the research I did as part of my PhD, part of the dissertation. And I was very curious about why are some teams highly creative and some aren't highly creative? And I don't know if you've had this experience, Jamie, but earlier in my career, I worked at a university and I was on, I was on a lot of committees because that's what you do when you work at a university. And some of them were amazing and super creative, and we got a lot done, and we were, unique in how we were approaching things. And other teams were just like painful. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, I just felt like I lost brain cells by sitting in the room with everybody. And often I wasn't the only connect. Like sometimes there were multiple people that were on both of these different teams. I'm like, okay, what is going on? It's not about just the individual. I was really curious, what is it that makes some teams creative and some not? So I dug into the research, I developed an assessment tool, and I came out with a measurement and identified 3 elements that teams need if they want to be creative together. And we can get into these if you want, but just at a high level, team purpose. So teams need to understand they need to have a purpose, they need to share that purpose, they need to be committed to it. So team purpose. The second is team dynamics, which is team members' behavior with each other, how they interact with each other. Do they trust each other? Do they communicate well? Are they able to engage in some appropriate conflict? Meaning not too much, not too little. And then the last one is team creative process. Does the team have a creative process where like they're following a process to be creative together? And that's the area that most teams are completely flummoxed by. They don't even know that there is a process that can help them be creative together. And so the book outlines, goes in depth on those, on the research, but then I also bring in a lot of examples and stories from my clients, from my consulting work over the last 15 or so years.
I think there's so many things in there, like so many questions going through my mind that I'm like, oh, I want to dive into this. I feel like this is a conversation that can go forever. I'm going to start at the end. So for the third part, so the process. Is this there really has to be a formal process, or is it sometimes with some of the teams more organic that, you can look at that and say, well, they have a process for being creative together. But if you ask the individuals, what's your process? They'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or is it really doesn't have to be formal written out that this is how we're going to approach things?
Well, I think that it's actually more effective if there's some formality around it. Now, formal in this case doesn't mean stuffy or like, very stringent. The challenge when teams don't know, like if you ask a team member, like, I don't know how we do it, we just do it, is what happens is you will be creative sometimes. And I call this accidental creativity. It's like, it's just, I don't know, sometimes we have creative results, other times we don't. But then if everybody on the team knows the process and understands it and knows like, oh, okay, right now we're in this clarify stage or we're moving into ideate, then it makes the communication smoother. It means less like roadblocks, less stumbling. I'm really fond of the phrase "go slow to go fast." And often when teams don't have a clear process, they like rush to the end and then it doesn't work, and then they have to go back and redo stuff and rebuild things, and it's sort of a disaster. I'm sure you actually see this in hiring too, where people like rush through hiring a person and then it's like a hot mess.
Oh,
And so I
exactly.
do think, yeah. So I do think that some formality helps, but formality doesn't necessarily mean like stringent or stuffy.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. I can totally agree with that. And as you brought it up to the hiring process, like I always say, it's like you have to have a process. You have to know like these are the steps that we have to go through. Is there some flexibility in there? Like I say, like when it comes to interviewing, have your list of questions that you're going to go through, but it doesn't mean you have to stick to that list of questions 100%. If the
Yes.
candidate says something that you want to explore it. Don't feel like you have to stick to this interview guide and leave that like gaping hole where you're just like, wait, I need to know that. Like, I need to know, I need to follow up. No, you can follow up. If you're asking questions and you're like, well, based on what they said here, I don't need to ask this question because we're running out of time and I can't get through all my questions, skip it. Come back at the
Yeah.
end if you feel like you have time. And so it's like you don't have to follow something 100%. You have the ability to say, this is the guide, but how am I going to get the results that I need in this situation?
100%. Yeah. I think the creative process is the same thing. And the more work I do as a consultant and I work with different industries and different companies, I see we can have a process for pretty much anything, and it actually will improve our work. And if we don't, then we're just sporadic or, ineffective, we get stagnant. And so, yeah, I'm a huge fan of process.
Do you think this also allows for people to feel more empowered to make decisions that should
Absolutely.
belong to their role?
Absolutely. I think it helps people feel more empowered to make decisions as well as just more empowered to share and to speak up. Sometimes when I'm talking to clients, they'll tell me, well, I'll often ask what their team meetings are like, and they'll say, well, they're pretty good. We have a couple people that don't really talk that much. Well, actually, by changing the process of certain conversations, you can set it up where every single person is sharing and talking, or every single person is contributing in some way. It might not always be verbally, but like I'm a big fan of post-it notes and writing things on post-it notes and putting it out on the table with everyone. And there's like, all sorts of techniques and tools you can use. But by changing the process, you can improve the team dynamics, which then you can also improve the results that you're getting. And if someone's not, if there are a few people on the team that aren't speaking up that much, like I would assume you want to hear them because that's why they're on the team. There's something they have to contribute. Otherwise, why would they be on the team? And so yeah, if you just can adjust the process, yeah, you'll get more brains in the room.
Yeah, I like that because they might not be speaking up because they have nothing to say. It's like sometimes we also have to remember that people process things differently. They could be that internal processor that by the time they're ready to talk, someone's already has the floor and is saying what, they're thinking. And, when you create those different processes, like you said, post-it notes or things like that, or giving people opportunities to talk can really help because they've had the opportunity to think the way their brain needs to think. And now they have an opportunity to share and not feel like, well, I never get to speak up.
Right. Right. Yeah. And some people aren't going to, elbow their way in as much as other people, which is in often case a good thing, I think. But I think to your point, your question about the decision making, sometimes what I see, and we've all seen this, right, where a team member, maybe it's the decision maker, says, "Oh no, we can't do that. We did that. We tried that before and it didn't work." Or they have some reason that a new idea can't be implemented, too expensive, too whatever. But there's some decision making tools you can use to help see, like, oh, actually, we could do this a little bit different, or it kind of just helps team members like slow down a little bit and look at things from a different angle. And that can actually make for better decision making rather than just like the intuitive, like, jumping in. So yeah, I just another example of how process could change the team dynamics and decision making.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Like, I think, I had this, I was pretty lucky when I was in corporate. I managed some pretty great teams, but there was one that if I had to rank them, it comes to the top. And I think there were situations like that where, we'd be talking about changes and things coming up and they'd present ideas and I'd have to be the manager to say, no, we can't do that. Here's why. And sometimes it was because I had more information than they had. And sometimes it was, that you're right. That is an absolutely fantastic idea. And the team that is trying to implement it actually tried that and it didn't work. And here's what they learned when they were doing it. But because we just created more kind of like discussion around it and everything instead of being just like, no, that's not going to work. No, we can't try
Yep.
that. This is what we're going to do. It was just kind of that more discussion. And I remember then there was this one time I'm like, okay, this team is going to try XYZ. And one of my team members had been on a team where they had tried something similar. And he raised his hand. He goes, have they tested XYZ with it yet? And I'm like, I have no idea. And he goes, we did something similar in the past. This happened, and this actually created a huge problem. So if they haven't tested it for this yet, they might want to do that. And it turns out the team hadn't tested it for that. And because this person felt that they were comfortable speaking up and we created that environment, he was able to say something that prevented there being a huge problem.
I love that. What I love too in that example, like how he asked that question of just like, hey, have they tested for this yet? Versus, oh no, we did that before and it didn't work, and then explaining the test. But
Mhm.
it sounds like he asked it in a bit of a more open way that invited conversation, which is a really important skill in teams to be able to do
Yeah.
that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and I really like just kind of going back to the whole overall process thing is it's kind of like I said with coming decision making and stuff like that. I feel like we can set guardrails without them being that kind of that, as we talked about, that plan. It doesn't necessarily need to be this is you can't go outside of this, but these are our guardrails. This is where you know like you're going too far and you have to come back. You can play in this box. Anything goes like inside this box. And I hate using the term box. I feel like that closes things in, but sometimes it's just like, all right, our team's allowed to do anything in here. Anything outside of here is another part of the organization or where management has to come in and so forth. And I feel like a lot of times, especially small business owners, we have so much on our plate, so much. And we're just like, I need to get stuff off my plate and I need to not be in the day-to-day and doing it. And I need a self-leader. But then they create these environments where someone can't actually be a self-leader. And they're like, the person didn't take initiative. The person wasn't, thinking, they didn't think out of the box. Anytime there was a problem, they came to me. And I'm just like, but did you create an environment where they had to come to you, or did you create an environment where they actually felt empowered to be creative and come up with ideas and implement those things and have those conversations? And people don't realize that you have to create an environment for creativity and self-leaders and things like that, that it doesn't just happen. You can't just hire someone who is used to being in that environment and expect it to just work in yours if you don't put in the time and effort.
Absolutely. I think a great example of that I've seen is when a team member will come to the leader and say, "Hey, I'm having a problem with this other team member." Da da da. They explain the problem, and the leader says, "Okay, I'll talk to them," or "Okay, I'll help you with that." And then the leader takes on that problem for themselves versus saying, "Well, why don't we bring them in and you two have a conversation and I'll sit here and help." And like empowering the team members to work out that problem together versus taking the problem on and then trying to solve it and then coming back and be like, okay, I solved your problem for you. And then I think when leaders do that more and more, team members learn, oh, what I need to do is go to the team leader instead of solving it myself, you know.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I like that. I feel like don't take on the weight of their problem. Help them solve the problem.
Right.
And I think that is such a great example of kind of what to do because yeah, if there's problems with the dynamic between two team members, is it really going to be solved when you put yourself in the middle? Or is it going to create more problems? Because it's almost like that tattletelling relationship where it's just like, oh, they came to me, now I'm going to go and lecture you, and hopefully that's going to solve things.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, now going back to the other parts. So, the first thing you talked about was purpose. And I think this is one thing where, I don't know, as I envision it, I think sometimes people get things wrong when it comes to purpose. Because you mentioned working in teams, like in teams, I think you said like you're working, it was inside the university, right? Where
That
you were
I
in this
did, yeah,
teams? Yeah.
personally, yeah.
So the universities are huge. They have lots of employees. They have a lot going on. And I think it's slightly different than small businesses where, you got a few employees there, but in university you have a lot. And I think I see this mistake a lot when it comes to setting that purpose is we think, what's that end purpose? So I would envision like at a university, you could easily say it's something around like, depending on the university, is it providing education to the students? Is it around doing research? What is that main purpose of the university? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the purpose of that project team. So is that where you
Yes.
kind of find like you need to be more defined on what the purpose is, and it's not necessarily your big business purpose?
100%. Yes. Like, your business has a mission or vision or both, and that's the purpose of the business. But then each team has another purpose, a sub-purpose. And even in a small business where you may only have one or two teams or, a handful of employees, well, yes, you have that big picture, but there's still all this like sub teams and sub projects that you're working on to get there. And so I think a great example, an easy example, I should say, is a marketing team, right? Like, yes, the marketing team is aligned to that big purpose, but at the end of the day, they are about marketing the thing, the product, the service, whatever. And so their purpose is to market it. And the marketing team is easy. So maybe that particular team doesn't need to have as much conversation about their purpose because it's built into their title. Although I do think at least having once in a while talking about it's a good idea. But other teams, sometimes it's not clear. And that's where having conversations about the shared purpose, like what are we doing? How does this connect to the bigger purpose is really important for teams to do.
Yeah. Well, I even think of the marketing team, like there needs to be that clear purpose because every marketing team's different. Like, what are you trying to do? I think of like my business and we really focus a lot on education. And when I tried to do other things with my marketing, like it just always felt awkward. So to me, it's like with my marketing, it's educational content first. We want to teach with our content. And yes, at the end of the day, the whole purpose of putting stuff out in marketing is to get more clients, to grow revenue in my business. So yes, there is that purpose there when it attaches back to revenue. But what is our purpose? To grow revenue by providing educational marketing content, which is completely different than companies. If you think about it, it's like, isn't it like the National Park Services or something like that? I think that's might be slightly different. They provide humor in a lot of their marketing.
Oh
There's
my gosh.
puns, there's all this stuff.
Yes.
Like they are hilarious. So
Their Instagram feeds are so funny.
yeah, like, and so, yes, their purpose of marketing is to get more people to visit their parks. But they're doing that differently. So if you just said,
Yeah.
we're getting more people to come out, that completely misses the purpose of that team and why that's what that team should be focused on. So I think like we can't just focus on these general purposes of, okay, if we have a customer service team, our purpose is to provide customer service, like excellent customer service. Like, well, great. That's the purpose of every customer service team. Every
Right.
marketing team is going to be to market the organization. You know,
Yeah.
what is the purpose of your marketing team within your organization that's attached to your values and everything about how you want to show up?
Yeah, and I think bringing in that piece around values is really important because we all know that, marketing, the way teams put out marketing varies greatly. Some of it is really creative, like I think the National Park Service is nailing it with their Instagram feeds, but there's other marketing that just feels kind of slimy and like, oh, I don't want to work with that company. And then others that just really builds this trust and connection and teams obviously have different perspectives because we see a lot of variety in the marketing world. So yeah, I think the team purpose, that conversation around values and like not, it's like, yeah, what are we trying to do? But then like how are we wanting to do it? What's the the guiding principles behind it can be really helpful.
Yes. Okay. My next question for you is if we're thinking about if you've worked with teams and everything that where you've helped them become more creative, what changes have you seen within those teams or those organizations?
Yeah, so I think one of the changes that I've seen is when teams understand creativity well and they've, worked through, they know that they have a clear sense of purpose, they've like really gotten strong in their team dynamics and they have this clear process, it enables them in some ways to be a lot more nimble. And let's say, an opportunity comes up and they can decide quickly, is this a good opportunity for us to jump in on or not? And then if it is, how do we do this quickly? So there's a story that I share in my book. One of my clients is this company called Bywater Solutions, and they have kind of a really unique business model. They're a fully remote company. There's maybe at the time I worked with them, maybe 25 employees. I think they have about 50 now, and they serve libraries. So they provide like the software that libraries use to, the book checkout system and the card catalog, or I don't know all the lingo, but anyway. And I worked with one of their teams, and during COVID, they had this really interesting opportunity. So this particular software is actually a free software. And then libraries would hire them to help like manage the software and operate all the back end. So on this forum for this particular software, it's called Koha. I'm not sure how to say it. Anyway, somebody said it would be really great if there was a plugin that would allow libraries to have, where people could order a book and then just come pick it up, like a curbside pickup. So this Koha team at Bywater Solutions, they saw this and they thought, hey, I think we could make that. And we could make it so fast that we could just give it away to every library in the world for free. And so they did. And later, when I was talking to the leader of the team, she said, Amy, we could not have done this if we didn't understand deliberate creativity and the creative problem solving process and the work that we had done was maybe a year before. And because of that, they were able just to go really fast. And sure enough, they put this out and they gave it to everybody who's using the software in the world. And my guess is if you're a listener and you went to a library and used curbside pickup, it might have been because of the software, which is really
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah, I love that. Love that example of just kind of, yeah, you can move fast. And isn't that one thing like we say is a benefit of small businesses compared to some like big businesses is we can move fast, we can make decisions, but we can't do that if we're not creative. Like we have the structure that should allow it, but we also need the thought process that's going to allow it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I love that. Okay. So we only have a few minutes before we're going to have to start wrapping up. So if listeners today are saying, I am recognizing that I don't act creative in my business. I'm realizing that there's a lot of problems that are stopping this. What are some of the first things you can do to start pivoting to the change where your business is more creative, but also not just kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off too much and creating that disruption in your business because your employees are also used to operating the way you've always operated.
Yeah. I think one of the first things that can be really helpful is just get a deeper understanding of creativity and how it works. And as we talked about in the beginning, we were talking about the definition of creativity. There are a lot of myths about creativity. And for instance, one of them is, we think that just some brilliant idea is going to come to us and then we're going to implement that and then we're going to just, make millions and millions of dollars and change the world. And, we use something like the Thomas Edison light bulb example of just like, oh yeah, he came up with this light bulb and then poof, like it was amazing. And it's like, actually, that was like many years of work with like over 1,000, actually, I think over 2,000 iterations before he nailed the right one, like that we're using today. And so I think first, like understanding creativity and how it actually works and how it shows up in teams. A shameless plug is the book that I wrote outlines all of this, and I just put a ton into it. There's also a bunch of activities in there that teams leaders can lead their team through. And so it might even be just starting off and telling the team, like, hey, I've been reading this book and I'd love to try a couple things and let's see if we can be more creative. And if it makes sense to have everybody on the team read the book, awesome. And it may not, depending on the team. But even some little things, like one of the things I share in the book is, okay, let's say you're in a team meeting and you're trying to look at how to do something different or a new approach to something. And so you tell the team, like, hey, this thing we're doing isn't working and we need a new approach. How should we do this? And just by saying, how should we, you're now asking the team, what is the right answer? They don't know because there's no right answer. There is probably no problem that your team is solving that actually has a right answer. Like, it's just not how the world works. Instead, there's 100 different approaches you could take. So instead of saying, how should we, say, how might we? And then just spend 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, 5 minutes generating multiple ideas. I had a colleague talk to me, somebody I met at a networking event, and she told me that every time their team is trying to solve a problem, whatever the problem is, the first idea that anyone shares is always what they go with, no matter what. They never talk past the first idea. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if it's not a good idea? And she's like, I don't know. It never occurred to us to keep talking about it. So instead of how should we, say how might we, and then spend 5 minutes generating a list of ideas. And even before you get into the ideas, I would say spend 5 minutes just really understanding the problem. So if you did that 10 minutes, ask how might we, whatever, how might we change our marketing approach to be more approachable? And then 5 minutes understanding where you're at now and 5 minutes for ideas, you will be more creative just in that one thing.
I really like that. And when you were talking about the team that would always go with the first idea, I think when you approach things differently than what you just said, in order to go to the second idea, you have to say that the first idea was wrong in a lot of ways. It's like, well, okay, that's not like someone has to poke a hole of why that wouldn't work. So if you approach it, it's like, we're going to come up with 5 different ideas. It's from the beginning. It's we're going to come up with 5 different ideas that then we're going to explore. We're not moving to 2 because we think number 1's not going to work and we're going to put down whoever's idea that it was. It's like, let's innovate. Let's get things. This might not be the only solution. So I feel like when you approach things from the start, you're opening the door to multiple ideas versus having to stop an idea to say, maybe that's not good enough.
You nailed it. I mean, that is exactly it. And I think part of what happens, like one of the mistakes teams make, and we all do this at times, is we present an idea and then we immediately evaluate it. And what would be better is get lots of ideas and then evaluate all those ideas, like which ones of these are the best ones. And yeah, that alone could change your team dynamics a lot and change your creative output.
Yes, yes, I love that. Oh, Amy, that's such a great way to start. So anyone who has a team that's trying to figure things out, like how to explore things, start implementing this. You can do it and just see what your team comes up with and see the creativity start to flow. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes, where you can have these conversations and it's just a part of everyday life in your business.
Absolutely.
All right, Amy, we need to start wrapping up. So how can everyone get in touch with you?
So you can find me online. My website is climerconsulting.com, and that is Climer. I also spend a fair bit of time on LinkedIn. I'm on the other social media platforms as well. And if you want a copy of the book, you can find it anywhere books are sold, or you can go directly to my website or the book website, which is deliberateCreativeTeams.com. And again, the book name is Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results. And if you're listening to this before March 30th, 2025, there's a lot of fun like book launch deals. If you buy, 3 or more copies, then you get invited to an event that I'm doing on April 9th, as well as some other fun freebies. So check that out if you're interested.
Awesome. So people can go and buy some copies for their teams. That way they can
Absolutely.
understand what you're trying to do inside your organization. All right, Amy, my last question that I love to ask all my guests. We've all had leaders or managers that have stood out to us. So think of a leader or manager that has stood out to you and share one thing about them.
One of the leaders that has stood out to me is actually a professor that I had who later became, I guess you could say, he was the executive director of a program that I worked with. So his name was Dan Garvey, Dr. Dan Garvey. And what I loved about him is that he had this ability to just, whenever there was a problem, he would point it out and he wouldn't ignore the problem. And he would do it in a way that was compassionate and open and invite conversation. And he was really good at, like, how sometimes there's like the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. He would talk about it. And again, he would do it in a way that was kind of productive, I guess I could say, versus like destructive. And it was an amazing example to watch him and to see him deal with some like really big problems too. When this organization I work for, they're called Semester at Sea. And we spent 4 months sailing on a cruise ship around the world with 800 college students. So as you could imagine, a lot of potential problems there
Right?
when you get 800 students on a ship together. But he just had this ability to address those problems in a really healthy way. And for a long time, years after my wife and I both worked on that ship with him, we would often say, if we were stuck, we would say, okay, what would Dan do right now? Dan Garvey.
Good. Creating that impression that lasts forever. So, all right, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today on the Growing Your Team podcast. I just absolutely love this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jamie. It was really fun.
Are you ready to hire a new team member for your business and you want to ensure you hire the person who can succeed in the role, make you happy, and positively impact your bottom line? Then let's talk and see how growing your team can help you master the art of hiring. Through bespoke hiring frameworks and comprehensive guidance, you will learn how to attract candidates who have the passion you desire and the skills needed to succeed. At Growing Your Team, women entrepreneurs and leaders work with us to help them expand their unique businesses by teaching them how to hire like a pro. Let's connect and see how we can help you. send me an email at jamie@growingyourteam.com. That's Jamie, JAMIE @growingyourteam.com, or head on over to growingyourteam.com/jumpstart, with jumpstart being all one word, and let's talk about how you can become a confident leader who hires right every single time.